everyone, this is The Last Word and I'm Maria Shakil. UK Prime Minister Starmer has backed India's bid for a permanent membership of the United Nations Security Council. This comes days after US President Biden and France's Macron made a similar pitch. Addressing the general debate of the United Nations General Assembly's 79th session in New York, Mr. Starmer said that UNSC has to become a more representative body. At present, the UNSC comprises of 5 permanent members and 10 non-permanent member countries, which are elected for a 2-year term by the General Assembly of the United Nations. The 5 permanent members are Russia, UK, China, France, and the US, which have the power to veto any substantive resolution. But India's road to UNSC has to go through multiple obstacles, including opposition from China, which is unwilling to endorse New Delhi's position. Can India gain the membership without veto power of China? Hasn't time come for UNSC to be more representative and India being accommodated to realize the regional aspirations? Let's first listen in to the reactions.
If we want the system to deliver for the poorest and most vulnerable, then their voices must be heard. We need to make the system more representative and more responsive to those who need it most. So we will make the case, not just for fairer outcomes, but fairer representation in how we reach them. And this also applies to the Security Council. It has to change to become a more representative body, willing to act, not paralysed by politics. We want to see permanent African representation on the Council. Brazil, India, Japan and Germany as permanent members. And more seats for elected members as well.
Tant que nous aurons un Conseil de sécurité qui est bloqué, je dirais de manière réciproque selon les intérêts par les uns et les autres, on aura du mal à avancer. Est-ce qu'il y a un meilleur système? Je ne le crois pas. Et donc rendons simplement ces Nations Unies plus efficaces. D'abord, en les rendant peut-être plus représentatifs, c'est pourquoi la France, et je le redis ici, est favorable à ce que le Conseil de sécurité soit élargi. L'Allemagne, le Japon, l'Inde, le Brésil devraient en être des membres permanents, de même que 2 pays que l'Afrique désignerait pour la représenter.
We have Lord Rami Ranger joining us. Ambassador Shashank is joining us as well. Saurav Shukla, Jonah Blank, and Dr. Harder is joining us as well. Dr. Harder, beginning with you. India, because of multiple factors, certainly deserves a place at the high table. But can it really happen without China's endorsement? Or how will India really find its way around it?
Well, I don't see how the UN Charter, the veto that the permanent members all currently have, surely gives China the ability to block this until some other way of reforming the UN is, which people like, ideas coming out of Brazil, for instance, in terms of reforming this in some other way. But at the moment, you can't get around the veto that the permanent members all have. And the state of China-India relations at the moment seems to me to suggest that China isn't going to, it is just simply not in China's interest to assist India in the way that you're talking about.
Okay, so Lord Ranger, the question really is that of the 5 countries which are permanent members, 4 of them are of the opinion that India should be given a place at the high seat. But there's one nation which is blocking India's bid. So the question is, shouldn't these countries ensure reforms are there?
Well, first of all, this is long overdue.
Yes.
As you can see, India represents nearly 20% of the world population. Indian diaspora of nearly 35 to 40 million strong in about 100 countries, very influential. India sending maximum member for the peacekeeping forces, And also India is a regional power, nuclear power, economic power, and it has never, ever worked against peace. So India is the right candidate. Talking about China, I mean, it is rich coming from China where the human rights are non-existent, one-party system, democracy non-existence. Just because they have economic power, that doesn't mean that all the other aspects, there are nearly 1 million Uyghur Muslim living in concentration camp in China. Nobody dares speak against China, not even the Muslim countries, which is a sad indictment of the system where people like China can stop the entry of a democratic, the biggest, the largest democracy in the world, getting its rightful place in the world and doing the best. The Indian diaspora, Indian people are shaping the modern world, exporting doctors, teachers, engineers, scientists to the world and running all the blue chip company. And to deny that country its rightful status and place is an insult to the United Nations and all the members, that this is a cartel where just, we look after each other and not the wider public or the world population or the interest of the global world.
Okay, so it's in the interest of the global world, but Ambassador Shashank, the question really is that here is UN, which is increasingly losing its relevance because it is not really representative anymore. Look at the fact that India, when it was it had the chair of G20, ensured the inclusion of Global South, because you cannot reflect the sentiments or reflect the issues of the world if you do not have a significant population of the African nations. It ensured that. Similarly, in G7, India gets repeatedly called because of the strength it has and the democratic strength of the nation, the oldest democracy in the world. But the larger question here is, I mean, if out of 5, there are 4 countries which are of the favor, then of course the 5th one has the veto power. All of these 5 countries have the veto power. Then how will India find its way around it?
Well, actually, it is the responsibility of the present members of the UN Security Council, and especially the permanent members, to keep United Nations relevant for the challenges of today. They made this organization in 1945, and it is still in the same mold. What we have seen is that G7, G20, BRICS, SCO, and so many other regional and interregional frameworks have come into being, and they are much more effective. And as far as security issues are concerned, there are 2 aspects. One is that Europe is as much divided as at the time of the First or Second World Wars, and there is no respite. Middle East is as much in flames. So therefore, whereas India or some other countries may be sending peacekeeping troops, but the point is that United Nations has proved itself totally ineligible to do anything for the challenges of today. I think the point is that it is for these countries, and I must say that China has conveyed to India that it is not against India's membership. It is a question of how they want the whole organization to be set up. In fact, their major objection is to Japan, not to India as much. The only thing is that, yes, generally people feel that since India is likely to be a democracy, China is not. So therefore, the conflict is between India and China. But I think there are other issues. In the European Union, you find that 2 countries are already members. France and then Germany is also an aspirant. Britain, which was a member, moved out, perhaps because of this reason, because there was great amount of pressure that EU should have only 1 representative and not 3. Therefore, I think these are all things which are going on. They are up in the air. We do not know when this final solution would come. There is a coffee club, which is led by countries like Mexico, Italy, Pakistan, and many others, who feel that the non-permanent membership should be increased rather than the permanent member, which means that this is a game which is going on in order to somehow keep the UN relevant and keep getting delegations and heads of states coming over to New York to make the UN relevant in the
Yes.
issues of today, which it is not.
Yes, absolutely. Saurav Shukla, India has for decades argued that it deserves to be the member of UNSC. There are other countries which are now batting for India. The fact is that UNSC doesn't really reflect the contemporary, geopolitical realities anymore.
Absolutely, Maria. India has been one of the votaries for reforming the UN Security Council for a long time. The G4, which comprises India, Japan, Germany and Brazil, were one of the reasons why India got these countries together. Also, if you want an effective rule-based international order, you have to make sure that Security Council is reformed. I want to take the discussion forward because I believe that this is the right time. Now that the momentum has been built, 4 members of the UN Security Council are speaking out emphatically about the reform, that the reform has to take place. India must take cue. And I believe diplomacy is the art of making things possible. And I think we should take on this momentum by not only galvanizing support amongst the members of the Security Council, the permanent members, but also the General Assembly, because that's going to be the first step. About China, Anton mentioned about China. Sometimes conflicts also open up possibilities. India does have enough cards, along with some of the permanent members of the UN Security Council, to also make sure that China falls in line. It's going to be difficult, but it's not impossible because there are enough levers that India has in terms of, the trade issues. There are enough levers that the US has. If these countries rally around and try to build pressure on China, certainly this is possible. But I think a great amount of momentum has been built at this UN General Assembly. I was there, and I can tell you, talking to a lot of diplomats there, this is the right time because they genuinely believe that the UN Security Council and the UN is ineffective without having countries like India on board, which can play a pivotal role in global affairs, whether as a peacemaker, whether as a unifier, or creating innovative solutions to the problems that the world faces. So I think we should make sure that it should be some amount of creative diplomacy along with the persuasion. And as Ambassador Shashank was also saying, China is not against India per se. It requires some deft handling and diplomacy. And certainly the permanent members of the UN Security Council, led by the US, will have to play a major role in this reform process.
Yes, so that's very well put, that there has to be an opportunity, perhaps even in this opposition, and the fact that trade is opening up. So will there be revisiting or rewriting of relationship between the two countries? Also, Jonah Blank, is the larger question, India-China.
Well, I think that the India-China relationship is going to be one of the huge questions of the coming decade and decades to follow. I agree with what the other panelists have said about the possibility of moving forward, because I don't see China's opposition as being 100% set in stone. I think that China would never, under any circumstances, give up its own veto. But as long as that's not being required, as long as the only question is, should India join the high table in some form, I don't think that Beijing is going to say absolutely no. There really is very little basis, I think, for anyone making a case that a high table without India is in any way credible.
Okay. Dr. Hara, coming back to you, the question is, what is the next step here?
Well, I think a number of the other, and particularly the ambassador, have already pointed the way. In some ways, it's an opportunity. It's to some extent, it's a bilateral issue, of course, between India and China. But India perhaps could take this as an opportunity to. It's the potential fruit of a restored relationship with. There are all sorts of problems, of course, in the relationship with China, but having this momentum now, this issue coming up with support from the other permanent members, seems to me to provide this opportunity to work on the bilateral relationship, which, as has been pointed out, perhaps China's red line in terms of the UN Security Council is more to do with Japan than it is with India. Creative diplomacy on the part of New Delhi looking towards Beijing.
And the fact here is that in the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine, the indication certainly is that India can play the role of the peacemaker. So here is a country which is being looked at by multiple countries as a possible peacemaker, larger role it can play. And Prime Minister Modi's famous words that this is not an era of war perhaps resonates more in these times. The question then is, Ambassador Shashank, what can be done in terms of can there be a more piecemeal approach towards achieving the larger objective?
Well, basically, it has to come to the General Assembly, which has to take a decision about expanding the membership of the Security Council with both permanent and non-permanent members. And once the General Assembly decides to expand the Security Council, then the question comes as to which members should join it. Africa has not been able to make up its mind, and that has always been the issue which has delayed the whole process. But perhaps one can leave 2 seats for Africa in any case, and they can decide whether they want rotating membership or they want a group of countries to represent them from time to time. And the same thing perhaps can be done for the European Union. And on the other hand, other countries can be allowed to come in. Then second issue comes about the veto. There is a talk that, well, some countries can be allowed to come in without veto, but not be at the same level as the first level of 5 permanent members. The point is that most of the decisions these days are being taken by the Security Council based on consultations and consensus. And most of the meetings are informal. Veto is used only in the last resort, in case somebody has to make a political point to oppose a resolution. And I don't think India or any other country would like to have membership as a permanent member without the veto. It has to be equal membership. You can't keep on having more and more categories inside the Security Council. India was very polite long time ago when we were offered the membership of the permanent membership of the Security Council. And we felt that rather than being another yes man in the Security Council, it might be better to have China there. And there it was. So China got the seat, which should have come to India. And at that time, it was mentioned that, yes, these are very informal timings, and UN Charter will be reformed. We need to continuously reform. However, now we find after 50 years, 60 years, that this is not done. Now, nobody wants to change anything. And I think best is that we must have representation from Latin America, from Africa, and from Asia, which are the largest continents and also are the largest parties affected by the decision of the Security Council. I think, therefore, it is important that they are there in the decision-making processes.
So in terms of influences, India, given the kind of influence that India has, Saurav Shukla, we are looking at what next here in terms of revising the agenda or revising reforms, need for reforms of this crucial body, or should we say that in case if it doesn't happen, although the momentum has been built towards it, India doesn't really have much to lose?
Maria, I want to say that the momentum, now that it has been built, it's a time for India to put reform of the UN Security Council and a seat for India at the top of its diplomatic, I would say, negotiating points. The entire issue had slipped because, we were embroiled in other issues. We were prioritizing other issues. But now that this momentum has been built, I would strongly recommend that India now takes this up with key interlocutors. The backing of President Biden is, again, a key signal that US is going to back India. And whatever happens in November, there's a bipartisan support for the India partnership. So that is something which we should put put as, I would say a priority point from here on, because India being there at the UN Security Council, as Ambassador Shashank mentioned, it was a strategic blunder to let go of this seat that we were offered, because India could have played a pivotal role then and now, even in a bigger manner, because not only, as I said, it can create doors of innovation, it's a unifier, and it's a country which has a lot to give to the world. And its voice today is heard by the global south and the countries which matter. That's the reason why it's in India's interest to put this as a strategic priority, make sure that the momentum is not lost, because, it's in our interest. And certainly, I agree that there has to be a formulation to be found where regions where there is no consensus being built, that can be dealt at a later stage, or they can go for a rotating seat. But India must insist on a permanent seat with a veto power, because we should not accept anything other than this, because this would be in India's long-term strategic interest, Maria.
Yes, absolutely. And Saurav Shukla, one may say that it's also in the interest of the world and these powerful nations as well, because, given the role that India is increasingly playing in shaping
for the greater good.
Yes,
for the greater good, the greater good of the world. Absolutely.
So, Lord Ravi Ranger, why do you think the new UK Prime Minister initiated this, endorsement for India?
Well, this is about time. The world has recognized India is playing a very mature, very important role. It's one of the largest democracies. As a matter of fact, there are two questions here. First of all, inclusion of India on the Security Council will make the Security Council more robust and more meaningful, because India is the only country which is respected by not only America, but also Russia. How many countries can claim this diplomacy where they are respected by the rivals? So therefore, India can play a moderating role in the Security Council, and it can bring a lot of stability in the world. And more importantly, at the moment, China is a member. China has been threatening so many countries around the world, from Japan to Korea to Philippines to Vietnam, you name it, and the South China Sea. The Quad has been made just to contain the influence of China. So therefore, India's inclusion will play a very, very important role in keeping China under check. And China's rivalry with India should not be allowed to damage the world, global peace and global security or stability. It is very, very important that the members should force the membership of India as fast as possible, because it is already at least 10 years too late. India is rising economy, rising army power. Influence of India is global, growing, and India has a unique position from this historical point of view to bring about a lot more lasting peace in the world, and also keep the world growing faster. So in my opinion, it is not a choice, but it's a necessity for India to be on the Security Council, because the amount of influence with Russia and America, India, no one has. So therefore, I think the peace could be coming through Indian diplomacy once India is on the Security Council. And I think all your panelists have spoken very well. It is up to India now to push its
case
position forward.
Yes. Jonah Blanca, I have just enough time for your comment. Please go ahead.
Yes, I think there's no good faith argument that having simply 5 permanent members is a fair representation of the global world order in the 21st century. And I don't think there's a fair good faith argument that India should not be at the forefront of any expansion. There is a good faith argument that once you throw the doors open, the UN Security Council will be more difficult to manage, but at least in my view, letting India and other countries in is very much worth that trade-off.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Anton Harder, Lord Rami Ranger, Ambassador Shashank, Saurav Shukla, and Jonah Blank on this discussion. We are putting out the entire discussion on ndtv.com. That's all from me. Thanks so much for watching.